and they were right on. So I guess they can do it.
Yeah,
And I got a chance to meet the two young men that had done the aerosol project for our science fair, the first graders that had actually won the K to 3 level. And they were quite anxious to share with me what they did at the thing, because I didn't get a chance to do it because I was in the other room taking care of recording scoring and things like that. So they were quite proud of it. And 7 of those kids went on to the Detroit Science Fair. And this is the first year that they were allowed to, because normally the Detroit Fair was for only the 3 counties right around the city of Detroit. And they've opened it up to some of the southeastern counties. So they took, everyone that they took got a trophy, except the one got an honorable mention. So I thought they're doing, that teacher's doing something right, and it's, you know, taking it all the way down to first grade. So it was impressive. And the other ones that I've gone to, they've 2 of the other ones were also doing field work that day. And again, I was impressed with the number of kids that were involved. The one was high school, and one was in 7th and 8th graders. So it's the report, the observation thing, I think fit very well. It seemed to work, you know, first grade on up. So I was happy with it.
Okay, thank you, Mike. That's great. And just before we go to the rubrics, I was just listening to you now, and I was wondering if maybe it would be worth keeping like some notes, since if someone goes to a school and they get impressed by something, and if you feel that something that's not covered in what we're already asking, that later on, because I think this would be valuable to add. I don't know what the rest of you think, but I think this might actually be really worth it for people to see afterwards, that you went and you watched these very young students and they were dealing with something which is not necessarily very simple, like the Beaufort scale, and they seem to be getting that. So all that thing, I think that could actually add to our work. I don't know what the other people think. Vagelia, Matt, Svetlana.
Yeah, I agree. I think those kinds of anecdotes really paint a picture that don't always come through in the data.
Well, if anyone seeing something similar can keep some notes of that, so that then you can the group and we can include in the reports. I think that will be useful.
Yeah, another high school that I went to for an observation, they actually had their sophomores who've been doing Globe all year. They were training the freshmen that want to go into that class for next year. So they were training them on the protocols.
That's awesome.
So, I mean, there is some light at the end of the tunnel. It's nice to see these kind of things going on. So.
Well, that particular kind of thing of peer-to-peer, you know, older versus younger peer work, that's actually the approach that that David Paget is taking with undergrads and high school students. So it'd be great if, you know, when we maybe after the school year is over, that we could talk about some of these things and find that we probably have a lot of contextual factors that we have in common that we may want to highlight, like 3 of our schools are doing peer-to-peer, you know, and finding, because that's actually a strategy that, you know, pedagogical strategy that is proven to support learning for both the teacher and the the mentee, right? So
Right.
there might be some cool things that we could learn about that. And I think we're keeping information about context as well. We have to, because as I mentioned, one of the first observation that John and I did, we were in a school where they weren't actually doing, it wasn't so much about science, the project was actually a social studies project. So we didn't observe globe being done, we just saw globe being mentioned. So we obviously have to provide context, otherwise you'll think that they didn't actually do globe. So it's, but we can have maybe even a box for context on the form as we update the form in the future or something. We can provide whatever contextual factors need to be documented. You know, I mean, right now we're just keeping, it doesn't matter, but I agree that we should keep that information.
Okay. So, do you want to go ahead with the rubric?
Yeah, would it be okay if we sort of went elementary and then the middle high school one? Would that be possible? Just sort of thinking up developmentally.
When you say elementary, you mean the one that?
I can't hear you, but I think the one Matt had.
Matt shared, yes, I'm sorry, you can't hear me so well. We're supposed to have a good connection. Yes, sure. So I can share that, or Matt, can you share that, or is it easier for me maybe?
So I have the one that you just sent.
Right.
Okay.
Is that the one we want to talk about, or is there another one? Are we talking about the?
Vagelia is talking about the one you sent, but the one that was for the elementary school. The one I worked on, I was thinking about middle and high school.
Yeah, that looks more middle and high school.
So eventually.
So we want to go back to the rubric from the science fair. Is that right?
Yes, for the one that you shared for the elementary level.
Yep, I can do that.
I can do that too if it's
I've got it.
okay.
Just look, make sure I get the right one. I think this is it. Yes.
So we had agreed to focus on specific categories, which were knowledge, asking questions, planning investigations separately,
Yep.
carrying out investigations, analyzing data, and interpreting data. These were the categories we had agreed to work on.
Right, and those are the same categories that are in the other one that you just sent.
Right, right. So if correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think this was like the one rubric that had no, it was the high school. No, never mind. That was right. So Vagelia, you would like to start with this one?
Yeah, so one thing this doesn't have in it is the evidence of content knowledge. That's the first category. So I'm not sure if you were drawing on the existing rubric that Svetlana had sent previously for that.
So in the document that I provided, I used descriptions that I had provided in an initial document like maybe 2 weeks ago. And we have not gone through that at all, though we had not discussed it. So because we were more, we were dealing with what would the categories that we would work on would be. And then we did not go so much into the descriptions of each level of accomplishment. So because I worked basically on the rubric that you provided. I used the one for high school, as I said before. But since the content knowledge was not included, I filled that with my thoughts from my initial suggestions. So it's a little bit of a mix up there. We can go through that and look into that if you want.
Why don't we pause on that one since you've got something written there already at the high school one, and we can look at that and a little bit and maybe start here with the asking questions. That would be the first category on the rubric we're trying to develop that's in this science fair rubric.
So you wanted to share that one so that we can go through that and see how we can maybe simplify it when it comes to the elementary school, and then we can continue with asking questions with yours. How about that?
Yep. Sounds
You want to
good.
look at,
Well,
sorry, are you saying? I'm not clear on what you just asked me to do. Did you want me to share the one that you sent this morning so we can start with content knowledge, or did you want to skip that and go to asking questions on this rubric?
So we can either go to asking questions and start working on this rubric, or I
Okay.
was suggesting that if you wanted to check to see the content knowledge part, maybe we could look into the other one that I provided and then go on. But either way is fine. So we can just, whatever you prefer, it's fine for me.
Okay.
I think it
Well,
makes
if
sense.
that's,
This is in front of us to work with this one instead of switch, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that will work for her because she has to leave early.
Okay, that's
So-
fine.
okay, great, great. Okay, so this is asking questions. It's not called asking questions, it's called research questions, but I think it potentially works.
The stuff
Yeah.
at level 3, what does this
Yeah.
mean?
Well, level 3 is maybe not completely up to date. You know, we're not using this rubric currently. This is last year's rubric. And since then, I've certainly gotten some feedback about this idea that original is an important characteristic because core science includes reproduction. That's an important part of science, is being able to reproduce results. So if you're trying to reproduce results, then your research question isn't necessarily going to be original, and that's really not anything that should be a negative that would reduce the value of that question or the research.
So,
Their original presentation is what we look for. It
Yeah.
may be a new way of looking at an old question, I guess, is the way we look at it.
Well, I'm asking like right on the first line where it says summary, a well-written complete summary is present that includes all of the components
Oh,
required.
we're not going to use that one. That's a different category. We're going to
Okay.
skip that one and go straight to asking questions.
Okay, that's
Yeah,
that.
this is, so we're looking at the last year's science fair rubric, and we're just going to extract a few categories from this science fair rubric to use for the rubric that's going to be part of this evaluation.
So Evangeline, we have actually, for us, the first category is content knowledge, evidence of content knowledge, but this was not included in the specific rubric. So we thought we would start from the second question just to save some time and look into what we've called asking questions.
Yeah, no, I remember the asking questions piece, but I was just wondering where that summary,
No. Yes, we're not working on that. Just a little thing here, Matt and everyone. I'm always a little hesitant when it comes to student work to use research questions, because that can be a little bit confusing, and maybe people are thinking about something else when they hear about research. So what if we specified it? We said asking questions like we've already done, or if we
Yeah,
say,
that's what I was assuming.
yes.
That's what I was assuming we would do, because your category on the other rubric is asking questions. So I think that is a foregone conclusion unless somebody wants to change it now. Certainly if it's at the high school, there's no reason why we wouldn't say the same thing at the elementary.
So, yeah, so where it says research questions, you'd say asking questions. Yeah. Now, I'm trying to figure out where you say clear, creative, and student-led research questions, including all of the components at level 3. Is that, I guess I don't necessarily understand why those levels things are in there.
Yeah, so that was the way that we handled it last year for the science fair, so that the judges knew that if you're scoring a project at level 4, which is superior, that you're not just looking at this box, but that you're looking at everything that preceded it. So these bullets are criteria that build over the levels.
Yeah.
So at level 4, you're looking at all of the criteria there, including these in the level 4 category.
Okay, I mean, that helps.
Well, this rubric required some training for our judges last year, so it wasn't something you could just use cold out of the box.
Right, and I guess that's my piece is that this is designed for a science fair, and are we talking about an elementary rubric that we would use in other instances besides a science fair? And how do we maybe pair this or make it more flexible so that it can work for other things besides, you know, a science fair, which is more culminating versus what might be project-based. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. And so maybe this one isn't that good of a starting point after all, because we're talking about asking questions in general, which, you know, there's already a lot of research on asking good questions for elementary. So we may find that that's more fruitful than trying to adapt this one for this particular category.
We had said, Evangeline, that we should be able to use this rubric for project, for example, and not just for science fairs. And when I went through, I actually thought that this specific item, which had to do with asking questions, I found it a little complicated, to be honest, Matt. This specific one, for example, planning investigations, carrying out investigations, I thought these were progressing very nicely, and that was the only reason I actually switched it in the other document, and I tried to make it a little more simple. I don't know what the other people think, but I thought there was a lot of information. For example, even on level 2, concern some aspects of Earth environment, answerable through scientific, and then student-led questions. Student-led research. Now, how would that be? How did you have this on mind? Would you like to say just a couple of things? This was not really very clear to me. Why we have to specify student-led, and if we do, how do we see that?
I don't think we need that. I think that can be let go. I think we should probably look at the things in this rubric that we want to keep.
Okay.
First, and maybe a better approach. So if we see things in these criteria that we think are useful for moving forward, then we know what we're going to keep, and then we can supplement that with, you know, other sources if we feel the need to create 4 unique levels, because we may not have enough here when we're done with this to create 4 unique levels, or we may want to look at something else for how that skill of asking questions progresses outside of a research project like this one.
Yeah, one thing I think we need to keep in mind also is the judges that we use are not necessarily going to be professional judges. So if you hit them up with too complicated a rubric, it's going to be, and I mean, that's one of the reasons we did ours the way we did, because anybody could read it and understand what it was asking for. So,
I would agree with you 100% on that, and I would take it even to the next step, which is if you give this to professional judges, I find it almost hobbling for them to have to use this when they already know, because they're professional scientists, they already know what makes a good research question. It helps them to be able to see how it changes because they're maybe not educators, how it changes at different grades. But this year's rubric is much simplified. It does not go into this level of detail at all of these categories because of that finding from last year.
yeah.
So we're looking at last year's rubric, actually. And what's in this year's rubric probably wouldn't inform our process very much because there's so little detail, because we're relying on the professional skill of our judges for evaluating these categories.
So just a friendly amendment to this is that I think it would be useful to keep the original in whatever edited version we want, with a little bit more detail that is potentially a tool that we use with teachers, either having them review it as part of a professional development session or just to have as a reference. For me, like the whole idea of student-led research, that I'm just using this as an example, shows up on all 4 levels. And I could imagine, and I wasn't in the meeting where this was language was crafted, but that it's a reminder to teachers that this is not about kids answering a teacher developed question, right?
Right.
and that there are a lot of teachers that in the most well-meaning way will prompt kids or give them examples or all those kinds of things. And we may even, I mean, it could be really cool PD as we go. We could even probably take 2 rows at a time and have a whole webinar on 1 row or 2 rows. I mean, it's complex sometimes to really let kids develop their own, especially when you say clear, creative student-led questions, right? So, and it would be useful in some ways for us to even be able to calibrate across programs, like what do we think this thing means? Then we can have a simple version for the judges. I will say that just my personal experience that my kids have been burned by science teachers who actually were not very thoughtful in how they administered rubrics or thought about student learning. So you know, we're assuming the best of judges, which I think is fine, but I think the teachers are the ones that need to be anchoring this, both for the kids and for the judges, because eventually they're going to be influenced by the judges' responses when they're eventually grading projects and things like that. So the teachers really need to be fully knowledgeable about what the intentions are, and, you know, and then they may want to help shape it for their own purposes as well. But I guess I'm lobbying for more detail on a PD version and maybe less detail on a judge's version and a student's version.
I guess I'm trying to think about, I guess I would agree less detail, because this to me really, as we said earlier, is about a science fair versus how do we look at student projects that might be classroom based. So I just think a lot of the language would be very different or at least some of the language would be different for a classroom, because in the classroom, it may not be just a single student-led piece. It might be a student group presentation.
Well, ours are going to be group. Ours are going to be group regardless. So, yeah, those are good.
The other thing
I
is,
mean, these are, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you know, this looks very specific for, you know, setting. So I'm trying to think about what could be things that we would write in that would be, if we're going to work across different groups, how to make it a little more open-ended, or not open-ended as much as I don't know, it has a lot of specifics in here that would not, I mean, in our current situation, I wouldn't suggest that all of our work is going to be just student-led. It may be student-led in terms of a student group that's put together a project, you know, and that could be 2 kids or 3 kids. And
No, it's true for this rubric as well, because the science fair accepts mostly group projects. There's very few, if any, individual projects in the International Virtual Science Symposium or Science Fair.
okay, fine.
The student-led here is meant to be plural.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and I'm thinking too that maybe we should have 2 rubrics. That one rubric doesn't cover everything, the science and the non-science projects. Just a thought. But because there's certain things that you're going to look for in a science project, a specific science research project, that would not necessarily have to be there for another project. Like you mentioned, Svetlana, that they were doing a social studies project. So that may not work with what we want in a science research project, but it would be a good project. So maybe we need to not try to make one thing be wonderful for everything. In other words, make two type of rubrics, one for specifically a science research project and other for projects that the groups are using or doing that are not necessarily science research.
So Mike, maybe then since I assume that most of the projects we're going to be looking into are science projects, right? Or no?
I don't know. It seems like Svetlana was mentioning social studies ones, and you know, Evangeline is mentioning ones that aren't specifically science research as such. So
what's that number?
that's the only thing I'm saying.
Thank you.
What if we focused on creating the rubrics that would be addressing science projects, and then working on these, we could make some simplifications and have a simpler version for other types of projects. Would that work?
Yeah, I think so, because, for instance, under the research questions, it says, you know, concern some aspect of the Earth's environment. Well, that's not going to necessarily work for sociology or social project.
I just want to just qualify what I said, Mike. So thank you for raising that. I think the beauty of a rubric is that it does convey what we want all teachers to be imparting to their kids. So it happened that in the case of the observations, we were observing a presentation of projects that happened to be social science projects. And you raised a really important issue. My hope is that that teacher will still be hitting on all of these different skills in other work that he's doing with his class, and that eventually those would show up in the presentation somehow. They got short shrift kind of because the social studies part of it took priority, but so that teacher actually has a rubric for that project. So I suspect that we can let the teachers who are doing couching their globe into a different context have their rubric for that. And I think I would like to still send a strong message to the teachers, not in a strong kind of way, but saying, you know, these are the things that we know are important for kids to develop, that can be developed through Globe, whether or not maybe we have them highlight the rows that they really want to focus on. Maybe planning and investigation is the most important thing in that class, and that they get a score of NA on some of the others, right? Instead of a 0, but they get, you know, well, the teacher didn't actually focus on those this year. I would be, I guess I appreciate what you said, Mike. I don't think that we need to do another rubric because the teachers put their own rubrics, and I think we need to provide this, and that we need some guidelines on how to use it when not all these skills were even taught, right?
Right. I guess that's so. I mean, are we being realistic? Should we all have we should have rubrics that apply to our context versus one that works across all our projects? Because I'm not sure. I mean, I know where we are, you know, we have, we're glad the students might be asking research questions. They're not going to necessarily have well-written. I mean, we have kids with very low skills in some instances, very low skills, and I'm just wondering about. I mean,
I agree. I agree with everything that's been said. And I think that our focus today should be to find out if there are things that we can agree on that are shared across the projects, across our different groups, because anytime you're doing an evaluation of such a diverse group, it's helpful to have something that anchors everyone, and then there understand that there might be different purposes within those groups. And so perhaps giving you all a little bit of freedom to take and augment or enhance or provide some outside directions or something like that that's not in the rubric.
Right.
But I think if we can agree on if we can just agree on if there's anything in this row that we all think is going to be important. For example, I think we're all talking about GLOBE projects, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what class it's in. So we're all talking about making sure this is about a GLOBE project. And that's partly where this concerns some aspect of the Earth's environment comes in, because the assumption is that if you're doing a GLOBE project, that you are dealing with some aspect of the Earth's environment.
Yeah, I'm all fine with that.
Yeah.
I was just trying to meet Evangeline's problem with, them not really doing all this stuff, so.
Yeah, and I don't know that
I think it might be helpful if we can first just identify those things that we do agree on, so that we have at the end of this meeting a set of things that we all feel comfortable with, and then we can decide if we need to add or take away.
Yeah, and so then just
Go ahead.
we could also have a process that we agree on, where maybe there's even another column to the left where the judge or the teacher, I don't know exactly how it would happen, would even check off if this skill set was addressed in the project, right? So, or put
Yeah, I got that. I think that's a good idea.
Oh, okay, it's really
That's a-
small. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, those are just my notes, so
Yeah,
it's
no
hard
problem.
to see.
Yeah, that's great. Yes.
Yeah. So I guess if I were to think of the elements that, if we kind of went down the row and thought about the elements, I do think, whether it's called summary or an overview of the project, that's one element. I do think the asking questions is an element. I think that there's the fact, whether it's called inquiry or investigation plan, that's an element. That there are research methods which are based on GLOBE protocols. That's another area. And then the question about content knowledge that people have been suggesting. I don't know if that's the first one or the last one. It depends on how you look at it.
First of all, I agree with what was said before. I think it's important to focus on the fact that we're doing GLOBE and we're using NASA assets in the classroom. So we should focus on that. Then my opinion is that if we find lots of groups that are involved in other categories which are not included in that, and then if they are addressed by their own teachers, like Svetlana mentioned before, then we're fine, and then we'll see if we need to do something else with respect to what Mike said. So for the categories now, I think that the descriptions that we are going to provide should have some detail. I agree with Svetlana, but I think they should also be as simple as possible.
Right.
Yeah.
That would make them easily usable. For example, in the research questions, just an example, I don't know if I would not include student-led questions in all categories. Maybe I would put asking questions in the general category and add in a parenthesis student-led, so that it applies
Right,
all across the categories, and then try to make this as simple as possible. For example, starting from the basic level questions, maybe simple enough so that they don't need any research or are beyond the scope of GLOBE. I would sort of simplify it like that. Then for the next category, I would say questions are clearly explained. I would not concern some aspects of Earth environment, because if we are looking into students that are working on using GLOBE protocols and NASA assets, I would assume there would be some aspect, unless it were a specific category where then we may have it specified, like the specific time was for a social science project, or was for a language project or something else, so it would be non-available. But I would not use that generally speaking, because we're looking into students that are using GLOBE, and GLOBE is an environmental science project. And then going further, just as an example, I don't know if we really need all the details. For example, in level 3, include a brief description of background information. Is it something that is not expected in a project and that would characterize good questions, for example? Just a thought. I think it's very important that it progresses to being like simple, then it becomes clearly explained, it becomes original, it becomes clear and creative. So I'm saying we should have a progression that would be, in my opinion, as straightforward as possible and not providing too much information. I thought this category was very rich in words. I don't know what the other people think.
You know what would be interesting is if Matt or you, or I don't know who's going to do this, is going to simplify it. It'd be great to revisit this because I realize that there are some assumptions at each of the levels, that clarity and creativity is something we would assume as baseline, and then we actually diverge in level. Oh, I was reading it backwards. I was reading it backwards. I thought that
it's okay.
weak was on the left. Weak was on the left, but that's the wrong way.
And just one little thing, not to leave what Evangelia said unanswered about the content knowledge. Why would you say that it would be last, Evangelia? Like, you think it's more important to see how the students move along the process of doing something?
Yeah, I think that's because I don't know, it depends on the particular project. And I'm thinking about the, and especially if it's done in different parts. So it's just
So yes, I see what you're saying. Could we share just for a minute? Either I do it or you do it, Matt. The document that I shared with everybody.
I'll bring it up.
the planar one, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because I think that's what I was thinking about.
Just for a minute there. So if you go to asking questions, because evidence of content knowledge and asking questions were my additions. Everything else was, I think, just very few things was the material that Matt provided. But I thought asking questions had too much information in there, and I thought maybe not necessarily exactly as it is, but in a way that is more simple. For example, questions cannot be scientifically tested or are beyond the scope of a GLOBE project. Questions are stated clearly with sufficient focus and can be scientifically tested. Questions are stated explicitly with the appropriate focus and can be scientifically tested. Questions are original, reflecting in-depth knowledge of the content, and consider ideas that previous investigations did not address. And of course, just as a general idea, I was thinking maybe we could sort of simplify this a little bit and not put so much information as far as the questions are concerned. I don't know what your thoughts are. We can go back to the other.
Where are you going? What? Where are you going?
Yeah, I think this is good. It's fairly straightforward. My only critique would be that the developing and the proficient are pretty close to each other. Hard to imagine how those would be applied differently from one another.
Okay, I see what you're saying, and I was having my concerns about that. You're right. There's a slight progression. Yes, something can definitely change there, but I'm mostly referring to the wording being, a little more simple, let's say, and straightforward. And then yes, we could probably change either one or the other. Probably level 3, I would guess, proficient. Yes.
So you were thinking about this rubric for elementary. I think this was for middle and high school.
Yeah, this was for middle and high school. I asked Matt to bring this out so that
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
an example of how I was thinking to simplify the descriptions of the achievement levels. And all the others that I have there, like planning, investigation, and so
Yeah.
on, the same ones as Matt had provided. So this.
Yeah, I'm gonna pop out in just a couple minutes.
Okay.
Anyway, but what I'm going to suggest is, having looked over this, I think that the only question I had, and similar, that developing and proficient, you might have to put some wording in there, the wording of original, or the wording of, I think there's some specifics that would make for how we know you're getting towards proficiency. And I don't know, I didn't think of which wording, but like under evidence of content knowledge, I guess I would say something like demonstrates clear scientific concepts covered in a GLOBE protocol, or clear concepts linked to a learning objective. Something like that. So it's more specific.
Are you referring to the content knowledge?
Yeah, that's where I'm just in that was the area that I struggled with.
Okay.
But then again, we're not working with content-based courses, so I was thinking in the way of the work we do.
So would you like that for the elementary school to be the last category, or not to exist at all, Evangelia? This is where
I would put it as a last category. I would leave it there, but I would just move it because I think it's the asking questions. It's working on it, at least at the elementary level, and as people just starting. That's the piece that we're doing our best to. What we don't have here is something about collecting data. That was the only other thing.
That should be under, collecting data should be under carrying out investigation.
Right, but
Yeah.
I don't.
Is it not there?
No.
Oh.
Yeah, and
no, I don't know.
well, we talk about data presented, so I assume you'd have to collect it
Right.
if you're going to present it.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you use the GLOBE protocol, you're collecting data, right?
Yeah. Okay.
That's why I used the wording that Matt had used in turn.
Yeah.
Having to do with the GLOBE protocols, because I thought that if we said students were using the protocol, then they would have to follow a specific process of collecting their data.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that for people who don't know GLOBE as a protocol, and just putting the word. That's all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if there's more things to be reviewed, I'm glad to come back to them, and I think we're on our way.
Yep.
So why don't we all see again the materials that have been shared, what Matt shared in this one, and see how Evangelia, I guess you would have to do that more for the elementary school.
Yeah, that's all I can do at this point, because we have no middle or high school yet.
And then the rest of us can see that for the middle and the high school, and send some suggestions as to how we would like things worded for each category, and collect what everyone suggests, and then have another discussion on the rubrics. Probably it's more complicated than it.
I know it should be able to be simpler, but it's hard. Yeah.
Yes, no, it's hard. Yes, it's very hard.
Okay.
So,
Bye
okay.
for now. Enjoy.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Matt,
Bye.
free.
Are some staying, or some? I know, Svetlana, you have to leave.
I have to. Yeah.
Okay. Bye, Svetlana. Matt, do you have to leave as well?
No,
Would you like
I
to
can stay if we want to continue to talk.
If there's something else that you would like to.
You know what? I would like one thing because it affects. I have a bunch of reports coming up for other projects. What's our target date for you know, we haven't finished all of the data collection, so we're going to need some time to, you know, whatever. It's going to take a little while. What's our target date for you getting a draft of our evaluation report?
So I'm thinking about that based on when we're going to have the NASA meeting, when they will need to see our final report. This is November 13th. So they usually ask for the report like mid-October. So it would be good for me to have it, of course, as soon as possible, but I would need at least 1 month to be able to
Mid-October, mid-September.
and to see if there are some patterns and to see if there are some things that are noticeable that we have to talk about. So like the end of August would be a pretty good time.
Okay,
Okay.
that's perfect.
And if you can give it earlier, of course,
Yeah.
I would be happy to have it.
Okay, awesome. Okay, bye everyone. Talk to you
Bye.
next week. Same channel, right?
Yep.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks. So for the middle and high school, what is your opinion about the content knowledge, Mike and Matt? Because I feel like it's an important category.
Definitely.
Before we talk about that, I just wanted to make a note,
Yes.
Nectaria. For whatever reason, I can't click on this document or do anything with it. So anything that's been said so far, I haven't been able to capture.
Oh,
So if you can take notes on your end, that'd be helpful.
okay. Okay, Matt. Thanks.
Thanks.
For doing that.
Nectaria, I have this recorded.
Okay. Okay.
So if we need to look at the video or listen, it's being recorded.
Okay. Perfect.
Thanks, Janet.
Thank- So I was thinking like for the middle and high school, the evidence of content knowledge could be where it is, because I do think it's important. I do understand what Evangelia says for the younger students, but even in that case, I do think it's an important category. And then
Nectaria, I just want to interject here. I didn't want to overstep my bounds, but their kids may not be there this year, but our hope is that we're all on the same page within another 1 or 2 years. So I think not worrying, well, if they're not there yet, where do we want them to be when you do these rubrics, which most everybody has been thinking about the future. You know, we all have places where our kids aren't at.
I agree with you. And I think that's one of the basic aims of the program as a whole, to see how kids can be progressing when they get into this type of involvement with GLOBE or with NASA assets. So you're I agree with you, absolutely. Yeah.
Right, and so even the teachers will progress, and if they're working with schools like they are, hopefully the whole school will progress. So they won't stay where they're at, otherwise we're not impacting their environment.
Right. Exactly. I agree with you. I agree completely. So my question would be to both, to all three of you, like how we can organize this a little more effectively so that we can progress, because it's every little block here takes some time to think. So maybe the best approach would be for everyone to go through those 2 specific documents and send their feedback in between, so that we can see what there is there to discuss. Because otherwise it looks to me like we have a very rich and very interesting conversation, but we're not really progressing very much with that. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I agree that it's helpful to have time, and I apologize for not personally putting time into this one before the meeting, but that's certainly my preference when I do.
Yes. So let's do it this way. I'm going to, we all have the materials, right, that have been sent. So why don't we say that we all try to work on these? Evangeline will work on the elementary. I don't know, Mike, if you would like to contribute to the elementary as well. I know you have experience in all grade levels or the middles, and then the middle school and the high school are going to be using the same rubric. So the rest of the people can focus on that and then have everyone's suggestions.
I'd like to just make one general suggestion.
Okay.
Could we put this on horizontally instead of vertically? It would make it easier to read it instead of,
Okay. Yes, I can do
yeah.
that. Everyone. Yes.
I think most of the ones that I have looked at kind of fall on horizontal.
Okay.
So
Yes.
that's just a small thing. I mean, it's,
Okay, so I can do that and send it to everyone, and then maybe people will be adding their comments on the side and sharing some documents, and we can discuss again next week.
right.
Hopefully, we can progress with it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Sounds good. All righty.
Thank you all.
Everybody,
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see y'all next week.
See you next week.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.